did this journey for you begin?
Well, I started off as a corporate art director and a graphic designer early on in my career, and I think that kind of kept my intuition open. It let me, if you have to design a logo for someone, you have to feel who they are and what kind of things would symbolize what they want to represent, and so it was good training because I grew up in the Midwest, and becoming a professional intuitive didn't exist back then, So it was a gradual process of working my way into it by following all my inner urges. And my inner urges were about mystery, finding out why things happened underneath the surface, bit by bit. So when I was in high school, even, I was reading about, psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain, and never thought I would be able to do it until I moved up to Northern California in my 20s and found out they had classes in developing clairvoyance, of all things.
It works.
And I studied it. And it turned out, since I'd been pretty visual anyway and was able to see in pictures, that my visualization skills were high, and I didn't realize it. And then I was surprised when I could, look at someone and get images, and then they turned out to be accurate or to actually describe something about the person's real life.
So many people have used intuition to get by on their day-to-day lives. And you say that intuition happens to be the most powerful survival skill that we have right now, so that we should be using it all the time. Tell me about it.
Yes, well, part of what I've been observing over all these years and is that life is accelerating, and I'm sure you talk about this every night with everybody just about, but that information is proliferating, the bodies are vibrating faster, there's information overload, it's almost too much to process with our analytical linear mind. We're able to process things much more directly and much faster with, just less time overall. And I always have called intuition direct knowing, where you don't have to have proof necessarily, but right in the moment, you get a yes or a no. You get a sense of what to do, and almost sometimes whole understanding of the nuances that surround an issue. So part of it is that I think we're accelerating right now so much into, I would call it life in the present moment, that we need a new kind of perception that allows us to handle the amount of information that's available. And intuition is that way of perceiving. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't use logic and we don't use science.
Which you have to, I think.
Of course. But to me, that comes afterwards. The intuition is the first grasp of things. It's that first sense. And
But how many people don't realize that? They get these intuitive feelings. They're there, but they don't act on it.
No, they gloss over them.
Yeah, they do. And then they say, oh my, I knew this was going to happen, but I didn't do anything.
Yes. There are so many different ways that our minds will negate or gloss over or go yes, but, and then, whatever comes after the but just negates the first part of it. And part of the intuition development process, of course, is really making an agreement with yourself to trust your first impressions. And I have this practice now that I do, which is I call it my inner perceiver. It's like that part of us inside that notices things.
Yes.
You and I could walk down the street together, same street, and my inner perceiver would notice probably a whole different sequence of things than yours might. And that would mean our realities would be different. And I notice what I notice, I figure, because I need to notice it. Because I'm trying to show myself something or teach myself something. So I've made an agreement with that inner part of my own awareness. Now, maybe that's the soul. I don't know. But I've made an agreement to listen to it and to talk to it. And so I ask myself continually throughout the day, well, why am I noticing this? Or what's the good reason in why this might be happening? And that way I get my guidance and my intuitive insight kind of regularly throughout the day. But it also makes me trust my inside.
Are women more intuitive than men?
Well, that's a common belief, but I think that what really is going on there is that women's brains are wired up a little differently than men's. Women have more fibers that connect the left and right sides of the brain. So the way they perceive tends to be sort of bilateral. They use both sides of the brain at the same time, which means that women have a hard time separating from their environment or compartmentalizing. Everything is connected and sort of unified. Whereas men are more unilateral. They use the left side, then they use the right side, and almost need to make a conscious decision to shift into intuition sometimes.
What's this saying about, mom's intuition, for example?
Well, I think that's maybe even father's intuition when it comes to a child.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to be almost energetically merged with your own child, at a whole body level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a slightly different sort of thing because it's almost like your DNA is overlapping, and the whole energy fields are merged. So you will tend to know almost empathically what's going on with your family members. It's common even like when a sibling dies or a parent dies or they're getting ready to, that you'll start to get fidgety and you'll start to know something's going on, but you won't know what it is.
And in some cases, you do know what it is.
Yes, sometimes.
What about children? Do they tend to be more intuitive than adults?
Well, there is what they call these new indigo children, or the newest generations of young people, which I think they say started coming in around 1970. And from what I've heard metaphysically, a lot of these are soul groups that were incarnated, let's say, in the mental plane, rather than having had a lot of physical lifetimes or physical experience. They have a very strong connection into the mental realm. And so they have a speedier way of processing things. There's much less understanding about the slowness of the physical world and emotions. And so they have this sort of rapid, direct connection with information and telepathy, and often are working in groups. They need to connect with each other, just, like gangs, and they all hang out together and do things together. And part of that is that in the mental plane, that's the way it is. It's a collective consciousness, and things are known all at once together. So I think that the kids have this special tendency to, let's say, be telepathic or be able to raise their consciousness into some of those higher realms. But then again, they also have more problem bringing that knowledge down through the body because they have more ADD and more environmental allergies and things that are disturbances in the physical body. And so I think part of the challenge with the kids is to help give them some training in intuition development and in how to stabilize the energies in their bodies.
Well, this ability to be intuitive, is it physical or is it coming from the subconscious? Is it coming from out there in the universe?
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's coming from both the higher dimensions and from the physical realm itself. But intuition is operative, let's say, when your mind comes into your body and centers inside the body in the present moment. So when the mind and body merge, then you become aware of the spirit. So in other words, intuition is a function of the way mind, body, and spirit all come together at the same time, and you have a total unity of awareness. So when that happens, and you can just get centered in yourself, let's say, the body will constantly be picking up, let's say, signals, from the field around you. That could be about whether you're safe or whether you're in danger or whether a house feels good to go in or not good to go in. And that is a kind of intuition. It starts off sort of as instinct.
Yep.
And that rises up the spine and comes up into the brain through the old reptile brain first. And you get those fight or flight signals, I call that in my book the truth signal and anxiety signal. So when something's right for you, you get excited and it bubbles and it rises up and you get warm and you lean towards something. And when it's not right for you or when you hear a lie, you get contracted and it feels solid and heavy like a wet blanket on top of you,
And still
But you know that instinctually, and that's a part of the lower brain. Now then it keeps rising up and it goes into the middle brain, which is where all the senses are. And that's where intuition starts to take on that sensory information of the vibration, the little voice in your head, the visions, the flashes of insight. Or even some people have a sense of smell. They'll smell certain scents that remind them of other people, and they'll know things from the way things smell.
Sure. Well, how about people who, like Grandma had a certain perfume she passes on, and people are convinced that they're smelling that perfume, months, years later in their room. They know that Grandma's visiting.
Absolutely.
Is that part of that?
That's part of it. Absolutely. Those are the inner senses, the subtle inner senses. And that's part of the way intuition makes itself known. It activates those inner senses. Now, whether you think you're smelling it or you're actually smelling it, in a certain way, your inner self doesn't know the difference.
And it doesn't really matter, does it?
It doesn't really matter, You're trying to get through to yourself to give yourself some information. So whatever works,
Absolutely.
And then it goes up beyond the middle brain, and it goes up into the upper brain, where it registers as sort of a meaning. It makes sense. And you go, aha, oh, it's a such and such, and you label it.
There's nothing like that aha moment. Penny, we're going to be back with you in just a moment. This hour, we'll talk about her work, The Intuitive Way. Next hour, we'll talk about her new work, Frequency, right here on Coast to Coast AM. In your opinion, what is intuition, Penny?
Well, to me, intuition is a kind of direct perception that occurs in the present moment without any need for logic or proof. It's kind of a perception where you know something all at once. And usually it's accurate in the moment.
But does it mean that there's something supernatural or something natural about it?
Well, to me, the supernatural is natural. It's just a higher frequency of our ordinary reality. And as I was saying before the break, some of the intuitive information rises up from the body, from things that are happening in ordinary everyday life. And you're getting information about what's safe and what isn't safe and what's right and what isn't right for you to do. But you also get a sort of a descending information that comes from the higher levels of your own self or from the world, in the higher dimensions of the world, which might be like your daughter's dream about 9/11, where it comes down through the upper part of the brain and drops down and finally registers in the body. And that may be a vision. It might be a dream, and so that comes in as well and needs to be grounded and made meaningful. So intuition rises and it descends. So I don't know if it's supernatural. I think we're all supernatural.
Have you found that people who tend to have these abilities are more spiritual than those who do not have the abilities?
I think that, some people open up in strange ways, sometimes suddenly, sometimes they have various psychic abilities. But I think that intuition is a broader thing than a single psychic ability, for instance. And that as you start working with opening yourself into a direct intuitive knowing, it almost always takes you into the spiritual realms. And it's not necessarily religious. It could be much more like mysticism, where you have direct connection with the Godhead or with nature or something. But I think that real true intuition always connects you with spirit.
You tend to be a little more telepathic if you're intuitive, I would think.
That would be one of the ways of receiving information, absolutely. You could be empathic, where your whole body can aesthetically receive impressions or patterns. And that's the way I work, is I just feel things.